Well, we've heard the phrase rose-colored glasses, and it means seeing something differently than the way it actually is. And author and speaker Kristi McLelland says we have the same distorted view when it comes to studying the Bible, and it's time we take a look at it through a completely different lens. Author, professor, and biblical culturist Kristi McLelland believes that in order to truly understand the scriptures, we must study them through a Middle Eastern lens.
If you've ever thought that the Bible is old, that the Bible is out of date, I don't have sheep in my backyard, and I don't draw water out of a cistern, but you start to see what it is that the living God is trying to communicate, not just to the ancients, but to you and me today.
In her book, Rediscovering Israel, Kristi helps us understand the Bible and encounter the living God like never before. Well, joining us right now on 700 Club Interactive is Kristi McLelland. Kristi, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, me too. I'm so excited. Okay, in 2007, you were invited to go study the Bible in Israel and Egypt. And according to you, that trip absolutely rocked your world. Talk about what happened during that trip.
The best way I know how to describe it, Ashley, and I say this all the time to people, is I went to Israel and learned that the living God is better than I ever knew. And wow. I thought he was awesome when I went. But it changed my life. I've been taking teams to Israel on biblical study trips since 2008, and it just feels like an adventure that found me.
Wow.
And it lives very much. I can feel it all inside of me right now, even as I'm talking to you.
Now, had you always been interested in studying the Bible more in depth? Like when you were a kid, did you have did you want to go to Israel when you were younger?
Yeah, that's a great question. I grew up in rural Mississippi with believing parents, and my father, from the time I was small, he would read stories to me in the Bible, and then he'd flip over to the map in the back, and he would show me on a map of Israel where the stories took place.
Oh, that's cool.
And I think it just started to connect to me, even as a little girl. I can go to these places. I can go see them for myself.
Yeah.
And I've been a nerd my whole life, and a Bible nerd. I've never been accused of being cool one day ever.
Girl, yes, I love
but
it.
I've always loved the Bible. I became a Christian when I was 9 years old, and I think really the Spirit of God at that time just gave me a curiosity for the scriptures, and it lives in me still and guides me, and is so much of a passion for me.
Yeah, well, talk about why it's so important that we do read the Bible through a Middle Eastern lens, and maybe what are some of the insights that we can gain when we do, and then maybe some of the things that we won't gain if we don't.
So I often tell my students or people around the country, all words only matter in context.
Wow.
It's not just what we're saying, but it's who we're saying it to. And it's where we are when we say them. And so to be able to get to know the Bible in its world, in its culture, within its history, within its geography, so many of the metaphors that we read about in the Bible, you go to Israel and you see them. You see shepherds with their sheep. You see ancient cisterns. You see vines and fig trees. And you start to understand, wait a minute, the living God was using imagery and metaphor that they saw every day. So just a quick example, because I love this one. One of the greatest metaphors in the Bible for us and the living God is that of a shepherd with his flock. And what do you see 10 times a day while you're in Israel? Shepherds with their flocks. And that moved me so deeply when I was there, because it is this daily reminder that good theology and the story's not up there and out there where we can't ascertain it or get it or understand it. No, the living God is our Father. He's bringing the story here. It is right here, right now, with and among us. And it just brought the Bible to life for me in a way that it's part of me now.
Yeah. Well, how can we practically do that? How can we practically read the Bible through a Middle Eastern lens? Maybe some of us aren't able to go to Israel to study. So what are some other ways we can do that?
There are so many resources. There are entire Bibles that all of the commentary is sort of the Bible through a historical, cultural context. There's authors and writers and teachers like myself that's our particular passion and vantage point of reading, understanding and communicating or teaching the Bible. But honestly, Ashley, when I hear that question, it's embrace the invitation that you too can go to the land. You can go to Israel. You can get to know the Bible in its native habitat, in its world, in the very incarnational spaces where these stories happened.
Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to talk to you about is obviously as you study the Bible through a Middle Eastern lens, some really amazing discoveries about women in the Bible. You talk about, so much so that you created a Bible study. It's called Jesus and Women. I guess talk a little bit about some of those discoveries that you came across yourself and then what you put in the Bible study.
Oh, Ashley, we could be here all day. Wow. So much is coming up in my heart right now, but I'll answer with what's coming up in my heart right now. So if you've ever heard a person say the Bible is antiquated, it's misogynistic, it's patriarchal, I'm like, what Bible are you reading? Because when I read it, I see these stories from beginning to end. You know, I'll just give you a couple of just quick pearls. You think about songs in antiquity. Songs mean so much. I believe it was the late Eugene Peterson that talked about song as heightened speech. And so when we look throughout the Bible, so many of the songs that we have were given by women. We have Miriam, her song after the Exodus in Exodus 15. We have Deborah in Judges 5. We have Mary, Jesus's mother, the famous Magnificat. And it's like, wait a minute, we have women's songs in the Bible?
I love that.
And I love even talking about Deborah or Devorah. D-V-R, the root of her name, Devar. In Hebrew, it's the Hebrew word for word. And your name is your verb, it's your embodiment, it's your destiny. So who was Deborah or Devorah? She is a woman walking around with the word of the Lord inside of her.
That's powerful.
So it makes sense that she's both a prophetess and a judge of Israel. But the Bible seems to be saying the word of the Lord has been traveling around in women all the way back to the days of the Old Testament.
Ooh, preach it, girl. I love this. I love it. I love it. Well, obviously, you know, if people have seen some of your stuff, they probably have seen this one clip going around on social media where you talk about God's first words about woman. And it's Ezer Kenegdo. Am I pronouncing it right?
Ezer Kenegdo.
Ezer Kenegdo. What is that? Can you just, I mean, we don't have a whole lot of time, but if you could just briefly share that pearl that is just so beautiful and that I know has impacted my life and I know continues to impact the lives of women all over the world.
So I'll try to give it to you in 60 seconds. Let me see if the professor can do this.
You got it.
So, you know, we know the Bible isn't the only ancient creation story. There were other Near Eastern or Middle Eastern stories, and what's interesting is in so many of them, woman is either not even mentioned or she's so weak and fickle, she's a pawn in the hands of the gods. So with all these stories going around, the living God gives his story. And in Genesis, one of the things that makes the biblical creation account unique from others is the placement in the story of woman from the very beginning. So in Genesis 2:18, we have this famous verse, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." That phrase, helper suitable, in our English Bibles, it's Ezer Kenegdo in Hebrew. And Ezer, it's helper, aid, strength. It's a strong word. It carries the connotation of helping someone in a way they can't do for themselves. So from the very beginning, woman is this strong help, this strong aid, this strong strengthening. But what's wild, Ashley, is throughout the Bible, oftentimes God is referred to as an Ezer. In his relationship to Israel. And we would never say that God was secondary to Israel. We would say he helped, aided, and strengthened her in ways that she couldn't. And a Kenegdo is sort of the one opposite to you, this complement to you, like you, but different than you, alongside of you. So these first two words about woman that's given in Scripture, the living God was making sure 6 verses are given for the creation of woman in a world of all of those other stories. And it really guides us into who we are and how we're meant to show up in this world as Ezers, as Kenegdos, as Ezer Kenegdos.
Right. How did that discovery personally impact you in your life?
You know, it was something that I learned in Israel, and it was right along the time I was learning that Jewish festivals and feasts, Shabbat on Friday nights for Jewish families, they often begin with lighting lights and that the member of the family that's given the honor of lighting the lights is the mother. And when I learned that, it just ran straight through my body. And I thought there's something so ancient and true, because as women, I think we are here to be light givers, light bringers. There's something powerful and lovely in the placement of women in the world. And so learning those things, I feel like it's helped me as a follower of Jesus understand who the living God is calling me to be, how he wants me to show up in my family, in my neighborhood, in my church, in the world.
Yeah, and I will just say personally, I mean, I mentioned this to you earlier, but I went to a Lisa Harper conference called Kerygma Summit, and that's where I met you and heard you speak on Azar Kenegdo, and I just think it brings so much confirmation that we as women are not just secondary, that God himself, we are his image bearer, right? Men and women alike. So, gosh, thank you so much for just continuing to share that pearl with the world, because I know it's changing a lot of lives. But something else you talk about in Jesus and Women in the Bible study is you say Jesus is bringing two consistent things into women's lives always throughout Scripture. What are those two things?
You know, there's a coupling that we see in Scripture. It goes all the way back to the book of Genesis. It's Mishpat and Zedekiah. Justice and righteousness. Psalm 89:14 says that God has a throne, and that the foundation of God's throne is made up of what? Two things: justice and righteousness, Mishpat and Zedekiah. And so when I read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and all the interactions in these stories where Jesus is interacting with a woman, he is bringing those two things into her life. He is bringing his justice and his righteousness. And just to say quickly, because this is a good Western, Middle Eastern differentiation, oftentimes when we think of justice, we think of scales, balancing something, getting something right. We're a right-wrong culture. The Middle East, both in biblical days and today, they're an honor-shame culture, more of a vertical culture. They don't talk so much about what's right and wrong. It's what's honorable and what's shameful. Well, who is Jesus? What does Jesus's justice look like in the lives of women? It's him reaching down, finding women anchored in their shame, lifting them out of their shame, restoring their sense of honor, and sending them forward in shalom. And then Zedekiah carries this idea of righteousness, but generosity. So Jesus wasn't just bringing justice into the lives of the women he was interacting with. He was bringing a generous justice into her life. And the reason we are moved by it is if Jesus was doing it for her, he's doing it for you and me right now while we're sitting here having this conversation.
Absolutely. Oh, my goodness. I love this conversation because it's obviously Women's History Month. And for those who might be watching, maybe they're Christians, maybe they're not, but they've just been a little bit jaded by some of their understanding of what maybe some scripture in the Bible that they're just confused about. What word of encouragement would you give them to just give God a chance?
That God gave us the Bible to create hope in us and not despair.
Right. Yeah. Amazing. Oh my gosh. Well, Kristi, I mean, like you said, we could just keep talking forever and ever, but I just want to say thank you for all that you're doing. And just keep doing what you're doing, because you're really making an impact, not just in women's lives, but men and women all over the world. Thank you. All right. Well, Kristi's new book is called Rediscovering Israel, and it's available wherever books are sold. Kristi, again, thank you so much for being with us. And I did want to mention she also has several Bible studies that you can get online anywhere, Jesus and Women, and some others that are just really impactful. Where can people find those?
Amazon.
Okay, Amazon, check out our website, all those things. All right, guys, we'll be back with more 700 Club Interactive right after this.